I have been having a Gothic year. Which basically just means I've been reading a lot of Gothic fiction because it is now my favorite type of genre to read. And what I have noticed in a lot of the books that I have been reading is how important the first chapter is. That not only does it have to grab the reader's attention, but it sets the stage for almost how the whole book will go. I've noticed in first chapters details of the past that the character represses, the absorption of other elements that they will experience, and even a character's psychological break. Now I have three what I consider classic Gothic novels that I will be discussing today. The first one will be Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I've talked about this book quite a bit already on my channel, but we have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. And a recent read of mine, because I am also having a Shirley Jackson year, I just want to read all of her work. I think it's spectacular. I'm still kind of dissecting this one. I've only done one read through. I think it needs 2 or 3, but hey, we have The Bird's Nest by Shirley Jackson. So the first one I want to talk about today is Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, because this is a famous Gothic novel. I have heard about it. I remember seeing, it was a different cover 15 years ago in the bookstore and being like, oh, that looks kind of interesting, but not picking it up for some reason. So to finally read this novel, it has never been out of print apparently. I was so excited. Also, like, they've done such a good job with the cover. I love the solid red with just a bit of a cutout of what's gonna happen. As you can see, I have taken a lot of notes on this first chapter, and I will admit I was calling it Manderley. Apparently it's Manderley. The first chapter is a dream of our main character, which we never learn her name. It is specifically like taken out. There's a conversation she's having with, they're not married yet, but her future husband. And he says something like, oh, that's so sad what happened to your family. And we don't hear that part of the conversation. It's just repressed, taken right out. And so we start with the dream, which again can be forms of repression. And she even says, and apparently this is a very famous line, first line of the book, how nice. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. Manderley. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. Again. She's dreamt about this before. While I was taking my Gothic course, it's kind of like, if you continually dream about something, it's a form of repression, that you haven't dealt with the emotions that you continually experience in that dream, or that situation that you experience in that dream. Of course, Manderley is like this huge manor mansion, beautiful home, very famous. So it has this like outdoor lodge for people to be let into the grounds. And she can't get through. It's rusted. There's no one in the lodge. She could not enter. The way was barred to her. The spokes of the gate were rusted and the lodge was uninhabited. So the outside's abandoned, neglected, decaying, rotting, and eventually she's able to pass through the gates because, like in dreams, you know, sometimes you can just do stuff. I was possessed of a sudden with supernatural powers and passed like a spirit through the barrier before me. And then she's explaining how the driveway to the house has been overtaken with nature. She almost doesn't recognize it. It's insidious. Tenacious fingers triumphed, intermingled in a strange embrace, making a vault above my head like the archway of a church. Strangled monster. So very scary and intense language being used because, you know, usually nature is healing, it's calming, but when it's something monstrous and you can't control it and it oppresses you, that's when it's not nice. And I'll read this little bit to you. Nature had come into her own again, and little by little, in her stealthy, insidious way, had encroached upon the drive with long, tenacious fingers. The woods, always a menace even in the past, had triumphed in the end. They crowded, dark and uncontrolled, to the borders of the drive. The beeches with white, naked limbs leant closer to one another, their branches intermingled in a strange embrace, making a vault above my head like the archway of a church. So why is this so important for the rest of the book? Well, Rebecca, who is the first wife that our main character marries, who dies suddenly, had such an impression on people that her actions and aura, if you want to call it that, are still in Manderley. And it's something that the second wife, we don't know her name, the narrator, cannot escape. And she becomes obsessed and absorbed almost by Rebecca's memory. She can't establish her own presence in the house. She doesn't have enough life experience. It's often pointed out that she's very young to have like a strong sense of who she is. And I think that that's spoken to with how she becomes a ghost and goes through into Manderley's property and then is met with this harsh nature. I thought the intermingled and estranged embrace really points to other parts of the book. This is going to be a spoiler, so pause and fast forward so you don't hear it. But Rebecca and Maxim had an open marriage, which was more on her part, it seems. And she even had relations with her first cousin. And I looked this up. It was taboo at the time. Like, this wasn't keeping it in the family, sort of England, that it was still quite taboo. And so the strange embrace and intermingled making a vault makes me think of like hidden. It's how hidden those actions had to be because that was part of their deal, Maxim and Rebecca. No one could know. And again, just more words describing the nature. I love moss. And it says, the drive was a ribbon now, a thread of its former self, with gravel surface gone and choked with grass and moss. I love moss. Moss is fabulous. I find moss very comforting, but here it's choking. And then again in a new paragraph, on and on, now east, now west, wound the poor thread that once had been our drive. Sometimes I thought it lost, but appeared again. Beneath a fallen tree, perhaps, or struggling on the other side of a muddy ditch created by the winter rains. I had not thought the way so long. I think what's really interesting about Gothic literature sometimes is how, like, a labyrinth, either in a house or gardens, talk about, the rules of, like, society and culture, and is it even worth it? That has a lot to do with, like, modern and postmodern literature, which was explained in that Gothic class to me. So I am heavily borrowing for one of the lectures. Like with here, I think that shows she was just continually, our narrator, losing herself. And every once in a while, finding her footing. There's a scene where Maxim has gone out and she's running along with the dog on the lawn and just having a really good time and feeling light. And then it goes back to being this oppressed and this heavy weight of the magnificent Rebecca on her mind, how she's never able to let that go and to establish her own self. And then on the last page, it's only 4 pages, the first chapter, it says, our fear and suffering lay buried in the ruins. There was no resurrection. When I thought of Manderley in my waking hours, I would not be bitter. I should think of it as it might have been could I have lived there without fear. And again, more spoilers, but Manderley is burnt down in the end, burning down the memory of Rebecca because everything that she put in the house had stayed. Yeah, very interesting. Because basically the whole first chapter is specifically talking about nature, the overgrowth, how it's insidious, it's gnarly, it's claw-like, it's choking. And that is how our narrator kind of experiences Manderley. She's not able to grow as a person. She becomes so timid and skinny, apparently. So this journey that she went on, she almost lost herself, like how she's trying to find her way to the drive. And in the end, it gets burnt down. And once she finds out what happened to Rebecca, she has this awakening, if you want to call it, and how she will never be the same, how she was so nervous to speak. She was fidgety. She does not feel like that person anymore and has like grown into her womanhood or something. Essentially, she burnt down that nervous girl and became the woman that she was with Rebecca out of the picture. And there's something very interesting in this book about library books. So here is where it is in the book, page 3. The room would bear witness to our presence, the little heap of library books marked ready to return, and the discarded copy of the Times. So I think this is really interesting because they have a large library, and it's funny to think of them having to go to like a public library to take out books. Library books. So I wrote responsibility left behind, something borrowed, never returned, not playing by society's rules. In the novel Rebecca's context, I think it's about the never returning. They have left and they will never return to like their original home. They cannot go back because just the haunting presence of Rebecca nearly killed them both. And so they will never be allowed to return. I think it's a little different and we have always lived in the castle. Now this is the third time that I have read the first chapter of this book, and I think I've been a little in love with Mary Cat, so I haven't realized how scary what she says is in the first chapter. I've been like, that's just Mary Cat, it's fine. It is not fine. She says very dark things, very, very dark things, which I ignored because I was just having a good time. So the first chapter in We Have Always Lived in the Castle. We are taking on Mary Cat's weekly trip to the town, which she does not like to do. She sees it as one of those like board games where almost like Snakes and Ladders, you go up and then you roll a bad dice and you have to go back down to the beginning sort of thing. So she sees it as almost a game of chance of what's going to happen. We just get this like, hey, who is this person? She's describing who she is. She's 18 years old. And what I thought was really interesting is I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet, who is considered the rightful heir to the British throne and what started the War of Roses. So someone who should have been head of like the monarchy, but wasn't. She liked him. A type of death cap mushroom, so poison. And everyone in her family is dead. She likes poison and she likes her sister and she likes this guy who should have been on the throne. Now, right away, we get a paragraph about library books. Yeah, page 1. The last time I glanced at the library books on the kitchen shelf, they were more than 5 months overdue, and I wondered whether I would have chose differently if I had known that these were the last books, the ones which would stand forever in our kitchen shelf. So these library books, I think is a little different because in the end, Katniss and Constance, again, we got spoilers, Katniss and Constance don't leave their home. They are nesters, they live in the kitchen basically now, and they don't leave. So it's not that they can never return home. I kind of see it more as there's that responsibility element, that societal expectation and like politeness that if you take out a library book, you return it. You don't keep it. And so here they are breaking societal roles. They are not returning, meaning not that they can't return to their home, but just that they are not playing by the rules anymore and they are doing what they want to do. More importantly, Mary Cat. And what I think is the most interesting, again, I'm reading this for the third time, but the interactions with Mary Cat, I think resemble what the interactions were like with her family. And these are all within the first chapter. Like we don't hear a lot about their dad, the brother, the aunt who died. It's not that we're not supposed to know, it's that it's other places in the book. There's this one sentence where she says, if it was a very good day, I would later make an offering of jewelry out of gratitude. And she repeatedly like makes these offerings. She has a bunch of them on the Blackwood property that she buries or like puts in the stream. And I thought that felt very like religious and spiritual, showing like gratitude, so you're gonna give. Almost how like superstitious they are, and I think shows Mary Cat's behavior for the rest of the book. So she has to go into this grocery store where when she enters, everyone like stops. And she feels the need to hold out her wallet so that she has money to pay for the groceries she's gonna ask for. I'm imagining it's like one of those counters where you ask for everything and then they bring it to you. And because Constance doesn't leave the house, even though it makes Mary Cat very uncomfortable and she hates it, she does it because she wants to protect Constance, who loves to cook, so she always gets it. Mary Cat asks for sugar, which was famously what the arsenic was in that poisoned all of her family, and someone gives a horrified laugh, and Mr. Albert, who is the man who like runs the grocery store with his wife, glanced past me briefly and then to the items he was arranging on the counter. And then she has this really dark thought. I wish they were dead. I would have liked to come into the grocery some morning and see them all, even the Alberts, lying there crying with pain and dying, which is exactly like what happens to her family. She has a brother who dies, and her parents, and her uncle Julian was supposed to die and then survived, and then her aunt passed away as well. So she is absolutely just like constantly rethinking of doing this. She has had these violent thoughts. She did it. And there's a time she remembered that she had spilt her groceries outside of the grocery store, and there's like the men of the town, they sit outside the community center or something, which sounds like it's right across the street, and they were laughing at her. She dropped the shopping bags and the eggs broke, but she told herself that whatever she did, I would not run away. Shoveling cans and boxes and spilt sugar wildly back into the shopping bag, telling myself not to run away. So it kind of sounds like her father was either quite abusive to her and maybe Constance as well. So I think this shows that even when things were going bad, she stood there. She held her own. She got through it. And she goes into a coffee shop, which has the owner, Stella. She says, Stella, she was round and pink, and when she put on a bright pink dress, it stayed looking bright for a little while before it merged into the dirty gray of the rest. And there's a scene later in the book where there's a fire, and Mary Cat sees half of it as like green and blues, and then the other half is like actual fire, so red and oranges and the danger. And so I think this is her almost seeing like the human in Stella, because Stella has been like all right to her, but then also she bleeds into the rest. She becomes gray like the rest of the town, and how like Mary Cat says it's a very dirty town, blah, blah, blah. I think it symbolizes for later in the book how Mary Cat can see the humanity in people, but also that color can bleed out and she can do awful things in order to protect herself. And then we have someone called Jim Donnell who enters the coffee shop and blocks Mary Cat in. And Jim Donnell is head of the fire department. So very traditionally masculine role, masculine job. So he has authority. He's an older man, resembling the father, not in looks, but just in social status. He blocks Mary Cat in and is asking about rumors of the sisters moving away out of town. And I think the dad and the mom were going to send Mary Cat away because either her behavior was so bad, and he's confrontational, he's rude to her, and I think really illustrates the relationship the father and daughter had together. And then she walks past a house where the kids are singing like a nasty song to her about her and her sister Constance, about the tea and the poisoning and the dying. And Mary Cat remembers a time in the past when the mom was out on the porch, and Mary Cat asks, "Can't you make them stop?" I asked her that day, wondering if there was anything in this woman I could speak to, if she had ever run joyfully over grass and had watched flowers or known delight or love. Can't you make them stop? "Kids," she said, not changing her voice, her look, or her air of dull enjoyment, "don't call the lady names." And I walked on while they shrieked and shouted, and the woman stood on the porch and laughed. I think that's kind of what the mom did. Mary Cat wanted help from her mom, and the mom did nothing to help her. Ooh, it's a good time. And if you're enjoying this video, please hit like and comment. It really helps me out. I am supposed to be studying for a test right now, but I would rather talk about books with you. I'll still study later, but you know, priorities. Okay, so this is one of the newer ones that I've read. This is Shirley Jackson's The Bird Nest, and this book is crazy. There's longer chapters. So we have chapter 1, Elizabeth, and then Dr. Wright, Betsy, Dr. Wright again, Aunt Morgan, and the naming of an heiress. So I found the first chapter was a larger portion of the book, and I felt covered a lot. So the first couple of pages talk about where Elizabeth works, which is in a museum. And I just thought there was a lot of really interesting information for Elizabeth's multiple personalities. Yes, this is about a woman who experiences multiple personalities. 4 years after the death of her mother and why she is the way she is. So I thought we could just do a little talk about it. I've only read this book once. I think I've already said that, but I find with Shirley Jackson's writing, and actually a lot of writing, like read the book twice. I know some of these books are like 800 pages these days, so maybe you want to just read a different book, but especially in a time of overconsumption, to reread your books, especially if it's like years later, because you'll have a totally different experience of reading it and understand different emotions just because you've lived your life. Anyways, so I don't feel like I have the best grasp on this novel, which is actually kind of funny because talking about a novel where the main character doesn't have like a grasp on her personality and her traumas and her repression. No wonder it's a hard book to analyze. Okay, so we have our main character, Elizabeth, and I want to read the first little paragraph here. Although the museum was well known to be a seat of enormous learning, its foundations had begun to sag. This produced in the building an odd and disturbing apparent list to the west. And in the daughters of the town, whose energetic borrowings had raised the funds to sustain the museum, infinite shame and a tendency to blame one another. It later explains that Elizabeth got this job because her aunt pushed her to do it. Her aunt thinks it's time for her to start working. This is who she lives with after her mother has died 4 years ago, so she's lived there for quite a while. I wrote museum. Old objects of importance, like what I think about with museums. Stolen cultural belongings. History, good and bad. Because there's a reason why Elizabeth works in a museum. It's not just out of a whim that Shirley Jackson decided to make her work there. And I also thought it was really interesting, like I had to look this up, what Daughters of the Town is. And they're like affluent women. They do charity work, raise funds for things, so no wonder they raised money for the museum. It's very interesting. So disturbingly apparent list to the west. So like it's leaning. And these fundraisers, the Daughters of the Town, whose energetic borrowings had raised the funds to sustain the museum. So for the museum to be sustained, it's borrowed money, they had to raise it. It's coming from outside. It's not being produced revenue by the museum. And I think what's really interesting is when you take the character and like apply it to the structure, which is very prevalent in Gothic literature, because usually a home can represent you as a person, right? You furnish it, you choose paint colors, you put pictures up to represent what you like and your tastes. But here, Elizabeth doesn't have a home. She lives with her aunt. And the description of the museum is it's like what's showing us Elizabeth's personality the most. So her personality is borrowed from others. And Elizabeth has money too that was left to her by her father. Like the museum, she tried to sustain herself, but the shame and tendency to blame one another. Her personalities like do not get along. They're all different, and especially one very strong personality named Betsy kind of pokes at the other personalities, doesn't like them, creates a lot of trouble for them, let's just say. There's a very learned professor of archaeology, which I think is talking about our doctor, who's going to be Dr. Right, which Betsy famously calls Dr. Wrong. And at the bottom it says, the contractor and the architect, along with the ill-tempered daughters of the town, endeavored to blame first the inefficient materials supplied for the building, and second, the extraordinary weight of some of the antiques contained therein. So Elizabeth, not only are her foundations not right, which I think is kind of like leaning towards her childhood, that she didn't have a great childhood, but the building built on top of that is just, what is the word? Inefficient materials. And of course, so Elizabeth works as like a clerk. She works on the 3rd floor, the furthest to the leaning side. So the part where you would probably feel the leaning the most. And she even outright says, Jackson, it is not proven that Elizabeth's personal equilibrium was set off balance by the slant of the office floor, nor could it be proven that it was Elizabeth who pushed the building off its foundations. but it is undeniable that they began to slip at about the same time. And there's this giant hole running down the building that's like right by Elizabeth's desk. And on the different floors, one was discovered behind a sarcophagus, the other one was by a little door that said "Do not enter." And I think, you know, with sarcophagus, you have preservation, you have death, and then with "do not enter," you have avoidance, which is just kind of what's going to be making this cauldron of what will eventually boil over and all these personalities finally come out of this hole. And even further, she's explaining all of this as she typed. This hole is to her elbow, directly to the left of her desk, as she typed. So again, ignoring, just going on with her day, not dealing with this obviously big hole in the building that's so obvious, but no one's looking at it. And later on in the novel, she goes back because she's been off work for a while. She goes back to the 3rd floor of the museum and someone else is working there because she doesn't work there anymore. I think she says something like, "Oh, they must have finished up construction with that big hole there." And the new person who's working there is like, "What hole?" So there was never a hole. And I thought what was really interesting is this sentence: "The faint sense of holiday, inspired by not having a fourth wall to her office." And it's kind of an odd sentence, isn't it? And I thought, as Elizabeth switches between her personalities, the non-dominant, like outward-facing personality, the other ones don't really know what's going on. Betsy tends to know, but the other ones not as much. So is this referring to that sense of Elizabeth disappearing and Betsy coming out? It's a sense of a holiday. And basically just how she didn't choose this as for her aunt to be able to give her something. She hasn't acquired any personality. She doesn't have friends. She doesn't do much. No acquaintances. So at least with her working there, she's able to start building something as Elizabeth. But as she does that, then it kind of comes crumbling down, doesn't it? It's also talked about Elizabeth's neck aches and headache, or backaches and headaches. And as someone who has been experiencing neck ache because I need a new pillow, oh my God. Usually that comes from ignoring previous symptoms, right? As I was reading it the first time, I kind of thought, well, maybe this is like Betsy really getting out and causing physical pain for Elizabeth so she would be able to take over the body in a sense, the psyche, right? But I also think it can be symbolizing just when you don't deal with things and they build up for 4 years, it's going to become very painful to not deal with it. Shirley Jackson, you're just amazing. I just think books can be so revealing, and really there is a lot of effort and planning that get put into them for character development to help reveal things about society and culture. And even like all these books were written in the 50s, so 30s and then the 50s and like 60s, I think, for The Castle. But I just find them so relevant today, and I've absolutely loved reading them. And yes, well, I said at the beginning, the first chapter, the first paragraph, it's got to pull you in. It's got to make you want to continue reading. But there's also so much more heavy lifting than that first chapter is doing. I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe are inspired to look at some of your favorite books and reread that first chapter to see if it's alluding to other parts of the book. I hope you are reading a really good book. And if you are, leave it in the comments. I'd love to see what you're reading. And I will see you in the next video.